freshman year of high school, each of the 4 marking periods, I took one of the industrial arts. Now, as you know, I retained none of those skills that were imparted to me in those classes, and I do pose a distinct risk to self and others if left in the vicinity of a power tool. And among the memories that scar me to this day are the little zap I got in house wiring and the really pathetic looking metal lantern I made in metal shop, and the experience of a bandsaw blade snapping right out of the machine as I was trying to put something through it. And through all of that, the teachers, each of them, very nicely had a way of encouraging me to keep up my stellar work in English and history, where I belong. And as dubious as all of those memories are from those classes, I think my crowning achievement came in the 4th marking period, silk screening. The air in the school at that time, freshman year, was rife with tension because the teachers were preparing for their first teachers' strike. And among the officers of the teachers' union was my silk screening teacher, Mr. Carew. And we each had workstations. There were tables around the room. And on the table where I was sitting was a manila folder marked "Top Secret, Strike Procedures." And no one knew what was in it. It just said "Top Secret." And I sat there with the other people at my table. I remember my friend John Min and a girl whose name escapes me. But I looked at the folder, and I didn't know if he had left it there carelessly or intentionally to try to drum up some kind of interest and support from among the students. All I knew was that my 14-year-old self was curious enough to open the manila folder. I never got to actually see what was inside because, like a flash, came Mr. Carew, who stormed up and said, "That's top secret." And he snatched it away from me. Now, being a child raised on 1980s TV and all of the commercials that went along with it, and also being much the same cheeky person at 14 that I am at 50, I innocently looked up at Mr. Carew and said, "I'm sorry, I got really excited because I thought maybe that was the secret recipe to Kellogg's Frosted Flakes. Tony the Tiger assures me they're great." Suffice to say that John and that girl were a lot more amused than Mr. Carew with me at that moment. He was even less thrilled with me when, about a month later, John and I destroyed hundreds of dollars worth of film when we did everything in the darkroom correctly except switch to that red light. But somebody got it. But all that fuss over something that was marked top secret. And that's the aspect of today's gospel reading that jumped off the page for me this time. Every year, the Sunday before the first Sunday of Lent, the Sunday before Ash Wednesday, the lectionary will give us one of the Gospel's accounts of what we call the Transfiguration. And here we are, with awe and wonder, maybe with some element of being incredulous as to how something this fantastic could have actually happened. Yet here we are, tiptoeing behind Peter, James, and John, following Jesus up that hill. The face, the clothes, the whole being of Jesus blinds with this flash of light. And then suddenly he's in deep conversation with Moses and Elijah, people from hundreds of years before. And there we have it. Jesus is with the law and the prophets. And in case anyone missed it, there's a voice from a cloud, which anyone at the time would recognize as the voice of God, because God would speak out of the cloud. The voice repeats the acclamation that God gave at the baptism of Jesus, affirming this is the beloved Son of God. Only this time, there's an additional direction. Listen to him. The Gospel of Matthew rarely misses an opportunity to make the point that Jesus is the one who's been anticipated from the beginning. And these verses in the Transfiguration draw heavily on the history and the life and the ministry of Moses. Moses, as Debbie had read, had taken 3 of his deputies up Mount Sinai for 6 days. Jesus and company went up this mountain 6 days after Peter makes his grand profession of faith and Jesus has begun to anticipate the cross. On Sinai, Moses encountered God in the clouds, and his face shone like the sun. Here it is Jesus who shines brighter than anything. Moses and Elijah, tradition tells us, were swept up bodily into heaven, and Jesus is anticipating the resurrection. All these parallels are there, with the gospel making the case that as great as Moses and Elijah are, this Jesus transcends all that. Then, as marvelously as they appeared in the first place, Moses and Elijah disappeared, leaving Jesus alone as the one to worship. All these wonderful, fantastic, and spectacular things happen before their very eyes on the mountain. Scripture doesn't tell us precisely where this mountain is or what the name of it is. And some people have actually studied it and think they have some idea where it is. But the scholars kind of tell us, sorry, people of Denville, we think it's not Mount Tabor. Because apparently there was a Roman guard post there, so it was probably pretty unlikely that that's where they would have gone. But the point of it not being named is that the site itself is really irrelevant. Jesus didn't come to create a tourist destination. Jesus is the destination. Wherever it happened, this transpired on a mountain. And God has told them, listen to Jesus. When God says listen, when Scripture says listen, it carries the dual direction, hear and obey. And what is it that they hear from Jesus? He says, do not be afraid. And he says, keep a secret what you saw here, what you heard here. Don't tell anybody about it. All this makes what happened top secret. Tell no one? Really, Jesus? Are you serious? These questions had to be in the minds of Peter, James, and John, if not on their lips. This is the most singular, incredible thing we've ever seen. Nobody's ever seen something like this. How do you expect us to just sit on this information? Think for a minute about a time in your own life where something happened that was so great, you were just bursting at the seams to tell somebody. Now, about the time that Amy and I started dating, I was already mentally trying to pick out reception venues. So then 5.5 years later, when she was at grad school at Temple, I found an engagement ring in Philadelphia on a weekend that I was visiting. And then I waited till Amy left the room. And I was practically doing like, I don't know how else to describe it, like a whisper scream to her roommate. Kelly, 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 come here, come here. Yeah. And I went rifling through my bag and I found the box and I opened it up and I said, look, look. And Kelly responded, slow down there, big man, in her distinctive Georgian accent. If you don't settle yourself, you are going to blow this whole surprise long before you plan to give her the ring on Christmas. Slow down there, fellas, Jesus tells them atop the mountain in his distinctive Nazarene accent, whatever that is. If people hear about what you saw and what you heard up here on this mountain, what a mess it'll be. My whole message, my whole ministry will get lost in the sauce of becoming a celebrity. If you don't settle yourself and keep this mountaintop experience top secret, you'll blow the whole thing long before there's an Easter. The Transfiguration takes on its significance and its meaning through the cross and the resurrection, both of which Jesus knows lies right in front of him. So he tells them to keep silent. For the time being, the Transfiguration had to remain top secret. Listen to him. Hear and obey what Jesus says. Get up and do not be afraid. Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. For us, even as we anticipate the season of Lent coming this coming week, we have the benefit of knowing that the cross and the resurrection have already indeed happened. Let us hear and obey what Jesus said in light of that truth. Get up and do not be afraid. Tell everyone about the vision. Unlike those three who were given the gag order on the mountain, we are not only free, but compelled to tell about Jesus. Do we tell people about this face that shone bright as the sun, so much that it was almost blinding to look at? Do we try to convince them that his clothes were so dazzling white that you just got to go out and buy whatever detergent this Jesus uses? Do we say that we overheard Jesus having the biggest power broker talk that there's ever been because Moses and Elijah were there too? Do we confess that we heard a voice coming out of the cloud that we knew was God talking directly to us? We could tell all those things. Of course, if those things actually were your experience, please let me know, because then I think it's time for me to take my diploma off the wall and hand this stuff over to you and let you be the pastor. My sense is that as important as it is for us to share the biblical narrative, part of this transfiguration story is that we are meant to tell of our own encounters with Jesus Christ. When have you been overwhelmed by the awesome light and gentle presence of God in Jesus Christ? What's been the mountaintop revelation that has made the difference in your life? Where have you felt so broken and alone that Jesus has been the one to come along and acknowledge your pain, placing an arm around your shoulder? When have you been in the depths of some crisis and you've heard the whisper to reassure you, not denying or negating or minimizing your pain, but offering genuine compassion? Perhaps you've heard audible words in those moments. Or maybe it's been the unspoken embrace telling you that yes, indeed, you are loved and that God has not abandoned you. Those are the top secret stories of the Transfiguration that people need to hear. By now, we don't live under a rock. We know what the trends are. Many in our community, in our culture, think that the things in this book are just ancient stories that don't speak to us today. They miss the T with a capital T truth that's in Scripture. And just as many people question if the church is still relevant or if its purpose has eroded with time. But what might happen if we dare to share our top secrets? To talk about those God sightings, as we call them with the kids in Vacation Bible School. The God sightings in everyday life, where something has seemingly gone wrong that turns a corner to go right again. Tell about God at work when you hear about it in the news. About those doctors and nurses who put themselves at risk to go into wherever the coronavirus is right now to try to figure it out and heal people. Announce to the world that might be as shocked as the Turkish community in Germany or in too many places here that God's heart breaks too when fear turns to hate that turns to violence. Pray for the courage and the grace to hold the hand of a grieving family or a frightened child. To say, I may not know how or why tragedy happens, but God knows what it's like to lose a child too. And God wants to comfort you. Each of us needs to be in relationship with God through Jesus Christ. May the secret from atop that mountain and the precious truth you tell in your very own story be what is heard and what is spoken.